Welcome to It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach with your host, Sister A. Legree. You can find out more about us by logging on to our website at igbattmho.org. Again, this is It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach. You can find out more about us by logging on to our website at igbattmho.org. Today, what I wanted to talk about was basically the gentleman that you see on the screen. Let me see if I can make it bigger for you. Okay. His name is Elias, and I'm not going to try to pronounce the last name, but his name is Elias. You can see it there. The report says the suspect accused of stabbing a Northwest DC woman to death while she walked dogs told police that a dog voice was speaking to him from inside of his head, according to court documents. On Wednesday, this was back in 2019. He was arrested at the age of 24 years old in connection with the brutal murder of 27-year-old Marjorie McGill. Okay. Now, just a little backdrop on him. Okay, I'm going to try to bring the other stuff here. Just a little backdrop. Okay, and I'm going to make it bigger so you can see it. But I wanted you to see his face and to see his age. We are talking someone who is 24 years old at the time this incident happened, murdered someone who was 27 years old. So we're looking at two young people just starting out in life. Elias was dealing with untreated mental illness, which is the topic today, is what is the impact of untreated mental health issues? What is the impact of untreated mental illness? When we talk about untreated mental illness, it costs us in so many ways. For the individual who is living with an untreated mental illness, it can cost them potential, it can cost time, it can cost money. For family members, it can cost dreams, it can cost vacation time. There's such a cost. And then, of course, when we look at what it costs our society, and when we look at jail time, when we talk about money, when we talk about just a whole lot of other issues, untreated mental health issues is expensive. And I have another article on that, but today I just kind of wanted to stick with this and share this particular story. So just a backdrop. This young man, he was, let me see, I can make this screen bigger. Please forgive me, I'm still kind of learning this system here. This young man, as the report says here, and let me read it first. This happened September 2019. A Elias was brought into the police station, and he told them that he heard dark forces speaking to him the night a dog walker was attacked. It says the report goes on to say that he's charged with second-degree murder while armed for allegedly stabbing Marjorie. Okay. Um, Miss McGill was stabbed multiple times in the neck, back, and shoulder while walking a dog. This was a big, a lot of people heard about this, especially where I lived at the time in the DC, Washington, DC area. Police brought him in for questioning that night. He told the detectives that there were dark forces speaking to him inside of his head. They talked about him, giving different answers under questioning. He couldn't remember basically what he saw. Detectives said that there were no witnesses who saw the incident occur. No one saw him on Irving Street, and that was the street where this happened. And there was no evidence that connected him to the crime. But they went on to say, fortunately, there was a video taken from a home security camera, which caught everything on the camera. So we definitely got him. We saw the victim walking away. We caught the camera caught him. You can hear her. The victim screaming, no, 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 and you can hear and see the victim being stabbed multiple times. Okay. So when we talk about Elias. Let's talk about first of all. Let's talk about Maggie. I think that's what they called her, Miss McGill. 27-year-old was out walking dogs. By all accounts, was a wonderful person. Was minding her business. Did nothing wrong. Had no idea that that day, that night, was going to be her last night. Elias, on the other hand, at the time was 24 years old. He had been, let me go back. While in high school, he was actually a pretty smart kid. He was actually a pretty smart young man. So much so that he was able to get a scholarship to a really prestigious school in Pennsylvania. His first year while he was in Pennsylvania, he didn't even finish, I think maybe he got through November, December. He wasn't in school long. Before he was sent back home, his parents had to come get him. He had what some people will call his first psychotic break. Okay. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. So he came back. Um, that is when he got his diagnosis. He found out what was going on. Now, at that time, the school had initially said that okay, we understand this has happened. Take some time off, no rush. Maybe come back next year. But he didn't do that. Him and his family, they wanted to rush the process. Which again, I'm not going to say rush the process. Let me say that. I'll say that. Rushed the process, and he went back to school again. When he went back to school after the holidays, he had another break. This time he was sent back. It was over. School was over. He lost his scholarship, and that was the end of it. Now, let me say this, being young at the time, this is not uncommon. Many times, what will happen, a young person, we call it the stress vulnerability model. So, what happens is that a young person will go away to school, and that is where, well, school, military, or a different environment, and start having challenges. Now, the fact is that this young person actually had challenges even before he or she went away to school, but it was an environment that they were used to. Everybody was used to the kid, this young person. So you didn't really catch it. You didn't really pay attention to it. You might think that maybe this person was a little, and we use a lot of different terms, maybe a little odd, maybe a little off, maybe a little strange. Maybe there was something, but you really didn't know what it was. Well, here's the thing: as long as the child, that young person, is in that environment, is a safe environment, he or she is familiar with the stresses in the environment. They know the people. They're fine. It's not until they go away to school and or to the military into a new environment where they're dealing with other stressors where we start seeing the issue. So we call it stress vulnerability model. So this person was already vulnerable to having to being diagnosed with a severe or persistent mental illness. They already have the vulnerability, but they were fine. It wasn't until they got into a situation that triggered, well, a stressful situation that triggered the symptoms. And stress, when we talk about, could be good or bad. Stress doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing. It could be going away to school, which is a good thing. But now you have the stress of new people. You have the stress of a new environment, and now the kid is having to adjust to that, and you start seeing um, issues or challenges in that area. So that happens a lot, and when it happens, family members or loved ones will say, "Oh, well, somebody probably they went away to school, and somebody probably put something in their drink." Or somebody did something to them. And a lot of times that is not the case. They were always on the edge. There was always a vulnerability, but you didn't see it because one, you were used to it. You got, it was fine. It wasn't until they went away to school that the professors, the other people, in that new environment begin to notice something was different. So that's what happened with Elias the first time. Okay, they noticed something was different. He had quote unquote what we may call a psychotic break, a psychotic episode. And again, for those of you who have been following me, you know what I mean when I say psychotic. Psychosis means out of touch with reality. We do know a person can have psychosis, can occur in a lot of different illnesses. So we do know that. So he had a psychotic break. He was sent back home, meaning there was some psychosis going on. He's either hearing things, seeing things. Something was going on with him. So he was sent back home. He still had a scholarship. The plan was get home, go back home, get help, get treatment. Okay. He came back home. He was enrolled into a clinic. But this again, what happens with a lot of younger people or people who are doing pretty well, or a person who just had a first break. Had their first psychotic break, or a person who's really has accomplished a lot in life, somebody who's doing really well. It is hard for them to kind of come to grasp with the fact there's something going on with them. Okay, it's a process. It's just like anything else. Think about it. You know, you're fine. You're doing great. You're eating great. You're exercising, and then you go into the hospital, and then out of the blue, the doctor tells you, "Hey, you know, you're going to die. You have 30 days to live." You're not going to process that. You're not going to accept that right away. More than likely, you're going to say, like, wait a minute, doc, I need to get a second opinion. I need to get a third opinion. You know, it's going to take a while to process it. It's the same thing when we're talking about serious and persistent mental illnesses or mental illnesses in general. The first time a person gets a diagnosis, it can be challenging, it can be hard. It's a process of accepting it. Everybody doesn't accept it right away, especially if this is a person who has been doing okay, a person who has done well. And in Elias's case, he was doing so well, he was able to get a scholarship. Um, I worked with someone who actually went to school with him, and they talked about, you know, yeah, he was a quiet kid, but he was a bright kid. Okay. So it was hard for people to believe that there was something going on with him. And remember what I told you about the stress vulnerability model. While he was in high school, while he was with his parents, they got used to certain things you don't notice. You don't notice about your cousin. You don't notice about your brother. Yeah, your brother. Oh, that's him. You know, he acts that way all the time. He doesn't bother anybody, but he's fine. Oh, she's okay. Yeah, I notice sometimes she may, get real anxious or, or become really angry, but somebody made her angry. She's okay. She'll calm down. We make excuses because we're used to the individual. Okay, so that's what happened. So when he came back the first time, um, he didn't really understand how sick he was. He had two parents. One of his parents, I think, was a little more in tune with what was going on as opposed to the other. But the problem was he was still in his early stage of accepting what was going on with him. Okay, and he was in a hurry to get back to school, despite people telling him, "Hey, you still have your scholarship. Sit out the year. You don't need to rush. You don't need to hurry and go back." Um, he went back. He went back. Did not do well. This time, school was over. He didn't. He no longer had the scholarship. Now he's back at the clinic trying to get treatment. I can tell you that his parents, especially one in particular, did all that they could to get help for him. They tried to get him at that time, they wanted to become his guardians. They wanted to take over. I can tell you that getting guardianship for someone with a severe and persistent mental illness is hard, is challenging. If you are a lawyer out there and you specialize in that, please give us a call so I can um, so I can refer you refer people to you because it's challenging. It's a lot of different moving parts. It's not as easy as you might think because it's courts really they don't take away somebody's liberty very very quickly, very fast. It's a lot that goes into it, right? So on one hand, you have the doctor, let's say the psychiatrist, the mental health team. Our focus is on getting the person well. Our focus is on getting the person to a point where they can be on a path to recovery. And like we said before, when we're dealing with severe and persistent mental illnesses, recovery means a lot of things. Recovery doesn't necessarily mean you're free of illnesses, you're free of symptoms. Recovery means that you may learn to live with it. Okay. We know that people with severe and persistent mental illnesses have families, they have jobs, they do well. It varies. Okay. So you have the mental health team trying to working at this angle. Then you have the family members who are trying to make a case for, hey, this person is incompetent. We need to take over their their life, so to speak. And then you have a judge who's a little skeptical. All three people working together, it can be challenging, it can be hard. I can tell you that living with someone with being a family member of someone with a severe and persistent mental illness when they are in their psychotic phase of their illness. The active phase of their illness is very challenging. It's very hard. You're trying to get the person help. They don't want help. You're trying to get them in a hospital. Let's say you get lucky, you get them in a hospital, they're not going to stay there that long because, again, the goal is not to keep people in the hospital indefinitely. So it's just a lot of back and forth. Just know that with Elias, his parents did try. When this first happened, I heard people making comments like, "Oh, the parents should be in jail because of they didn't do this, they didn't do that." They did try. I can tell you that they did try. Um, the system is just so hard. Our mental health system is just so fragmented, difficult. And in this particular area, we call it the DMV, right? The District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia area, because it's so close. This kid, he was with us for treatment for a while. Then he dropped out of treatment and then he started bouncing around. So he went from Maryland, he would be in Maryland for a while, he'd be in Virginia for a while, he'd be back in the district. He'd be in Maryland for a while, Virginia, district. Okay. In fact, when this incident happened, he had just gotten out of a facility, a mental health facility in Maryland. He had just gotten out of it. So he goes back and forth, back and forth. Okay. So over a period of time, he went from someone who was able to go to college to someone who was had to leave college because of his illness to someone who was just chronic, did not do well. He would just go in and out, in and out. So now we get to this fateful day when he stabs this innocent young lady. He stabs her. Now he's in the legal system. And I always say this is ironic when how his parents were trying to get the legal system to help. They were trying to get the legal system to step in. It was so difficult. Now it took him committing a murder before the legal system decided to step in. So let me see if I can make this okay, okay. So this is pretty much kind of the same thing that I read. Okay. So what I wanted to do, I wanted to share why things are a little just a background. I wanted to talk about competency for a minute. Um, I hear a lot of people, and I'm reading my notes here. They say, "What happens when someone okay, a mental illness? People think having a mental can a person I'm reading my notes here. I'm sorry. Can a person have a mental illness, still commit a crime, and still be held accountable?" And the answer is yes. People think that when a person says, "Oh, yeah, I have a mental illness," or when the lawyer says that a person has a mental illness, that's a get out of jail free card. That is not necessarily the case. Okay. So having a mental illness doesn't mean that a person will not be held accountable for their crime. Okay. What I wanted to do, um, we probably won't get through this in this episode, but I wanted to share some background. Okay. First of all, a mental illness. A mental illness is a condition that impacts a person's thinking, feeling, or mood and may affect his or her ability to relate to others and function on a daily basis. Each person will have different experiences, even people with the same diagnosis. Okay. How do people get a mental illness? And mental health isn't a result of just one illness. It can be genetics, it can be environmental, it can be lifestyle, it can be a variety of things. So keep in mind, a mental illness is a condition. Okay. We're talking about a health condition that impacts a person's thinking, feeling, or mood. Think about spirit, soul, and body. Think about thoughts, feelings, or behavior. Okay. When we talk about a mental illness. Now, when we talk about mental disorder, so I'm talking about two different terms here. So the first one I talked about was a mental illness. Okay. It's a condition that impacts a person's thinking, feeling, or mood. Now I'm talking about the disorder. The disorder is when we're talking about now a clinically significant. That means that this person meets the definition, they meet the diagnosis for having a for having a mental disorder. The latter term I talked about is it covers a wide variety of things. We talk about a mental illness, but we're talking about a mental disorder. The word here is clinically significant, meaning that they meet there's certain criteria in order to have a mental disorder. Okay. Now the DSM-5 is a big book that we use that categorizes mental illnesses or mental disorders. What I wanted to just, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I want you just to see that there are at least 20 major diagnostic chapters or illnesses within the DSM 5. We talk about bipolar, which people have heard a lot about, personality disorders. When we talk about schizophrenia, we talk about, which we see here, anxiety, OCD, trauma and stressor related disorders. So, again, when we talk about a person having a mental disorder, we have to think about. So, the question is, can a person say they have a mental illness or mental disorder and still be held accountable? Yes. Why? Because there are different types of mental disorders, okay, at least 20. And then there are different levels, and which I did not put this on here, right? You look at the symptoms, right? The symptoms could be mild, moderate, severe. The symptoms, a person, depending on the illness, some of these illnesses with treatment, a person may only have one episode. Some of these illnesses will be lifelong. When we talk about schizophrenia, for example, which is what Elias had, a person may have, they may hear voices all the time, or with medications, they may only hear them sometimes, right? A person with schizophrenia may have auditory hallucinations. Sometimes they may have somatic hallucination. It varies. For this topic, I just want you to know that when we talk about mental disorders, there are at least 20 broad categories that we talk about that's listed in what we call the Diagnostic Statistical Manual or the DSM-5. So what we do, we open up the DSM-5, we have the category, and we look at the different symptoms. We get the symptoms. How do we come up with the symptoms? By doing a good diagnostic assessment of the individual. Okay. So it varies. Okay, let me get back here. So can a person have a mental illness, still commit a crime, and still be held accountable? Absolutely yes. The issue, the key issue, is how the illness affected the person's ability to understand, reason, or control their actions under the law. A person with a mental illness can be found incompetent or competent to stand trial, but having a mental illness alone is not enough. Okay, so for me to say yes, I'm diagnosed with schizophrenia, in the case of Elias, it was not enough for him to say, okay, or even though we have all this history that he was diagnosed with a mental illness, and that should be an automatically get out of free jail card. That's not how it works. The key question, there are different questions that have to be answered. One of them is whether the mental illness prevents the person from understanding the legal proceedings or helping with their defense. So that's the first question. Okay, is a person capable of standing trial? So you have to decide at that time, yes, he has a mental illness, but does he understand the legal proceedings, or is he able to help with his offense? Okay, so that's the first step. Okay, having a mental illness, okay, fine, you have a mental illness, so what? You're diagnosed with schizophrenia, so what? Okay, can you stand trial? Is he competent to stand trial? In the United States, a defendant is generally considered competent to stand trial if they can. If they can understand the nature and the purpose of the court proceedings, understand the roles. Okay, I'm the judge, this is the prosecutor, this is the defense attorney. If they're able to speak with their attorney. Okay. Now, when we people talk about the insanity defense. It's important to distinguish competency to stand trial from the insanity defense. Competency to stand trial concerns the defendant's mental state in the moment. during the legal proceedings. The insanity defense concerns the defendant's mental state at the time the offense occurred. So when we look at Elias, okay, that we need to figure out, they needed to figure out, was he competent at the time, at that moment, to stand trial? Did he understand what was going on? Did he understand, okay, what the judge's role? Did he understand the charge? Did he understand the prosecution? Is he able to aid in his defense? What is his mental status? What is it like at that moment? Is he competent to stand trial at that moment during the legal proceedings? In contrast to the insanity defense, which a lawyer, and as we go on, we'll see what happened. The lawyer will say, is he able to, was he competent at the time? What was his mental state at the time he stabbed this lady? What was the mental state? Two different things. So again, can a person with a mental illness, diagnosed with a mental illness, be tried and convicted and go to jail? Yes. Is having a mental illness a get out of jail free card? No. Because the first question we had to figure out, what is your mental state like? Are you competent to stand trial? That's number one. And then before we can even get into an insanity defense, that we got to look at your competence at the moment. Okay. And then, okay, at the moment, yeah, he's competent, he's able to participate in the trial. Now his defense attorney will come up with a defense and say, we're going to use the insanity defense. Because at this moment, at the time this incident happened, the alleged offense occurred. He was not mentally, his mental state was altered. Okay, so two different things: competent to stand trial, and then the insanity defense. Okay, now once the defense attorney says, raises concerns and say, yeah, judge, okay, I just want to let you know we're going to go with the insanity and well, the insanity plea or whatever. The judge now is going to order a psych evaluation. Okay. Um, if the person is found to be incompetent, then the judge, and it depends on the different state, a couple things will happen. If the person is found incompetent, the trial is going to be paused while they receive treatment and restoring competency. If competency is restored, the trial can proceed. If company if competency cannot be restored, the court will determine the appropriate legal steps, which will vary by jurisdiction. Let me pause here for a moment. Okay. So, okay, I commit a crime. I'm arrested. I go to jail. Whatever. I'm standing before the judge. They have to decide if I'm competent. Okay. All right. Let's just say check. She's competent to stand trial. Okay. My lawyer will raise his or her hand and say, "Hey, judge, yes, she's competent to stand trial, but at the time, okay, she was not competent at the time the trial. I mean, she committed the crime. I'm trying to go back. Okay. So again, competency, she's able to stand trial. The insanity defense, the judges, I mean, my lawyers stand up and say, yeah, but at the time, we have some concerns about her mental state. We don't think she was, all competent at the time. We want to go with the insanity defense. Okay. We don't think she was competent. Okay. If there's concern about my competency, let's just say, let me not say that. Let's say that at the trial, the judge determines there's some concerns that I'm not competent. Okay. The judge can also do that at the time. If at that time, if I come in and it is found that, okay, let's say I'm not competent. The judge doesn't think I understand what the who she is. I don't understand what the prosecutor's doing. I can't aid in my defense. At that time, the judge can request a competency hearing. Okay. The competency hearing, this is where a psychiatric evaluation, and if the person and a judge will pause the trial, okay, we're going to get a competency evaluation on her to see if she's able to stand trial. Okay. The competency evaluation come back. If the judge determines, the competency hearing says, yeah, she's able to go forward. She's fine. She can aid in her defense. Then we move forward. Now, if so that's fine. Now, but if things go on and my lawyer decides, like I said, we're going to say I'm not found to be incompetent, or we're going to go with an insanity defense, then that's different. Okay, because like I said before, um, that's looking at what my mental status was at that time. So if the judge my lawyer is going to go with the insanity defense, okay, then this here will also apply. So now we're going with a hearing. Okay, judge is going to do another hearing to see what my psychiatric evaluation is like. Now, what sometimes will happen here is that if I'm found to be incompetent, or if the judge believes or my lawyer proves that at the time of the incident that I was not competent, I was insane at the time of the incident, then now there are different things, there are different steps that can happen. Okay. Now, a finding of not guilty by reason of insanity, um, it's different because it's different. It depends on the court. It depends on what your particular state. The bottom line is, if I'm found to be incompetent and my lawyer proves that at the time of the incident I was incompetent, and I want to go with not guilty by reason of insanity, then it can either it will delay the process. How long it delays the process will vary. Okay, we can say, okay, we're going to delay the process, okay, until you become competent. It can be years before I can be found to be competent to stand trial. Okay, there are some people who are actually that are in this psychiatric facility for 10, 15, 20 years because they've been found to be incompetent. They're not able to stand trial. Okay, so in a proceeding like that, yeah, they could be there forever, right? Or it can be a long time into waiting until this person becomes competent to stand trial. Or there are times, which is what happened in this case, he actually pled guilty. Okay, he did plead guilty, so it was a little different. But I just want to kind of share these different wordings. So a finding of not guilty by reason of insanity is different. That, like I said, this determination concerns the defendant's mental state at the time of the offense. Okay, at the time of the offense. In this case, the court ultimately accepted an insanity plea after the incompetency proceedings. People who are found not guilty by reason of insanity are not simply released, like I said. They are typically committed to a secure psychiatric hospital and remain there until a court determines that they no longer pose a danger due to mental illness. In some cases, the confinement can last longer than a prison sentence would have. A finding of not guilty by reason of insanity is different. Okay, it's legally it's different. Yeah, it's different. A finding of not guilty by reason of insanity is legally different from being found incompetent to stand trial. Okay, when a person is just found to be incompetent to stand trial, that means they're going to be in a mental health facility until they gain competency. Okay, for a person that's found not guilty by reason of insanity is different. When you're found not guilty by reason of insanity, you are going to be put in a facility and you can be there forever. Okay? Because the courts have already determined that you are not competent. They've already determined that at the time of the incident there were some mental health issues going on, so you were not competent. So because you of your mental health illness, we're not going to say that you're guilty. We're going to say you're not guilty because at the time of the incident, that the incident happened, you aren't unable, you didn't know what was going on. You were in a psychotic state. You didn't know what was going on at the time that incident happened. So we're going to let you plead or give you a not guilty by reason of insanity. But not guilty by reason of insanity doesn't mean that you're going to walk the street. And that's the thing that I think that gets a lot of people upset because when you hear the term not guilty by reason of insanity, psych ward. We think, oh shoot, so now he's not even guilty, right? He's not guilty, right? And he's in a psych ward. Oh yeah, right. He'll be there for about 5 years and then he'll get out. I can tell you many times when a person is not guilty by reason of insanity, they are in there for a long time. Many times they are in there longer than they would have been if they were found um, if they would have went to jail. So again, let me be clear. Let me back up. Um, like I tell people, I'm from the South, so I talk fast sometimes. So let me slow down. So I want to make sure that you understand the difference. A finding of not guilty by reason of insanity is different from being found incompetent to stand trial. Okay. Remember what we said what competency was. So is the person competent or incompetent? If they're competent, we're going to move forward with the trial. You're moving forward with the trial. As you're moving forward with the trial, during that process, your lawyer can still say, put up an insanity defense. If they put up an insanity defense, that the trial continues on. That's just your defense. Your lawyer has to prove your insanity defense. Okay. But when we're talking about incompetent. What we're saying that they're saying is that you were evaluated and you've been found to be incompetent to stand trial. When you're incompetent to stand trial, the trial cannot move forward. The trial does not move. There is no trial at that moment. Everything stops until you are able to be restored to competency. So the goal is competent, incompetent. If you're found to be incompetent, the goal is to get medication, to get support, to boost you up to be found to be competent. That's the goal. Okay. We want you to be able to understand what the judge's role, the prosecutor's role, to aid in your defense, to understand what your defense role is. We need you to be competent in order to stand trial. If you're not competent, the person is not competent to stand trial. They flunk that competency hearing. They will be put in a hospital more than likely until competency is restored. Competency, restoring competency can take a long time. It can take for some people, it can take a long time. Okay. Because what we're doing, they're getting the medications on board. They're getting, because we know medications work really well, especially when we talk about psychotic symptoms. We're trying to get you to understand what's going on. That's one piece, right? But when we're talking about a person being found not guilty by reason of insanity, there was a trial. Either there was a trial or you took a plea, okay? The plea or the finding was you were found not guilty by reason of insanity. You were competent, you went to trial, or there was a plea during the trial, and the plea was you decided to plead to not guilty by reason of insanity. The judge accepted the plea, or you know how that goes. Or you were found to be incompetent, and rather than waiting years and years and years to bring you back for a hearing, you know, the judge, you and your lawyer decide to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. So, not guilty by reason of insanity, what it does, it just kind of gives the person I don't want to say, we can't say you're guilty or not guilty because at the time of the incident, you were not competent. There was some mental health concerns. You were psychotic at the time, meaning you were out of touch with reality during the crime. So while Elias was stabbing this poor woman, he was incompetent. Not only was he not incompetent, his lawyer was able to put forward the guilty by reason of insanity plea. So that's what he pled to. So what they're saying is you were guilty, but we can't say that you're guilty because at the time you were not competent, you were psychotic. So we're going to let you plead to not guilty by reason of insanity, meaning at that moment. Okay. Um, so I just want to be clear. So when a person says not guilty by reason of insanity, you are in a psychotic a inpatient facility, you're going to be there forever. You can be there for a long time. Okay. Now, if a person is just waiting for restoration of competency, you could be there 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Because the goal is to see if you'll ever gain competency. There are some people that are there a long period of time, some people there are a short period of time. But once that person is found to be competent, they're going to trial. Okay, we don't care how long it takes, you're going to trial. But usually, to be honest with you, if a person is incompetent, um, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, there's usually the court is usually going to maybe um, do something else. The lawyer is going to do something else. So there was just some points that I wanted to share with you. Okay, I wanted to go over what a mental illness was. Okay. Um, is a condition that impacts a person's thinking, feeling, mood, behavior. A mental disorder, when we talk about a mental disorder, we're talking about a clinically significant situation, meaning now you have a diagnosis. Okay. You have a diagnosis, you meet certain criteria. And I wanted to separate the two because a lot of times people will use the term mental illness when they really mean a mental disorder. Mental disorder means a person has a bona fide DSM 5 diagnosis that you carry. Okay. Wanted to share that. Can a person have a mental illness, still commit a crime, and still be held accountable? Yes, as we seen in the case with Elias, he was held accountable. Okay. Um, Mental illness is not an excuse. All right. A person with depression, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar, or schizophrenia may still be found legally responsible if they understand their actions and could control their behavior. So that's not a excuse. Okay. The insanity defense, like I said before, your lawyer is going to have to show certain things. For example, the lawyer must show that because of the illness at the time of the offense, that the person meets the legal standard for insanity. And the legal standard for insanity varies by particular state. So again, this excuse a person has a mental illness and I'm not responsible. And I'm saying this for those people who are tired. Like I heard people say, I'm tired of people blaming mental illness for everything. That's fine. A person can have a mental illness, just like a person can have diabetes and still go to jail because they committed a crime. I can have schizophrenia, I can have bipolar, I can have PTSD, I can have whatever mental illness I have. That does not excuse me from going to jail. Okay. If I'm competent to stand trial, I'm going to stand trial. The problem comes in is what my mental status was like at the time the incident happened. At the time the incident happened, if my lawyer can prove that I meet the insanity the threshold, then that's a different story. And if I meet the insanity threshold, then I may be able to plead uh, guilty by reason of insanity. But if I get the guilty by reason of insanity, trust me, I am going to be in jail for a long time. So it is really hard to pretend to pretend to be insane enough to the point where you're going to be able the judge is going to give you or allow you to plead to not guilty by reason of insanity. It's really hard. The threshold is high, right? That person's going to have to jump through so many hoops. At some point, you're going to get tired of playing the game. You're going to get tired. And again, I'm speaking to people who say, "Oh, people are just pretending to be quote unquote crazy. They're just pretending to be insane." By the time you go through so many things, so many steps. If you're not insane and you're pretending, you will be by the time the process is over. Competency, yeah, a person can pretend. It may, people have gotten through, but it's hard. It really is hard. There are a lot of steps involved with that. But do you have people that pretend? Sure, you do. I had people that would pretend to be sick all the time in order to get benefits, right? Or they pretend in order to get Social Security. They pretend in order to get housing. But I can tell you, um, as time goes on, we usually can figure it out, right? Now, this is what happens. Let me say this before I close out, because I've been talking for a while. Remember, I talked about the different illnesses. There's one particular category where we talk about personality disorders. Many times, what happens is a person, most of us, you can tell, you're pretty good, people I'm talking to, realizing that if a person was maybe not competency, but you can tell when a person is psychotic, actively psychotic at the time you see the person, right? What happens is there are a lot of people in the legal system with personality disorders. Personality disorders does not is not the same as being insane, right? A person can have a personality disorder and which is different. Not all mental illnesses, not all mental illnesses are treated the same. Okay. We treat people with schizophrenia, bipolar different than when you treat a person with a personality disorder, right? Personality disorder is a little different. Person is not out of touch with reality, right? They just have some really maladaptive personality traits that make things difficult. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that out because a lot of times the defendant that you hate, we all have that defendant that just gets on your nerve. You think about the Dow Brooks case. Those of you who don't know who he is, Google him. He was a person who killed several people during it was a Christmas parade in I can't remember the state, but you can Google Darrell Brooks. Everybody hated Darrell Brooks because he had a personality disorder. You can say yes, a personality disorder is a mental illness, and at the time he did have a personality disorder, but it's not a psychosis, not out of touch with reality. So again, there are certain defendants we just don't like, and when those defendants, the ones you usually don't like, are usually the ones that have a personality disorder. Those are the ones that get on everybody's nerves. Those are the ones that want to represent themselves. Those are the one that comes in with the what do you call it? The sovereign citizen kind of defense. Those are the ones that come. They rub you quote unquote the wrong way. They usually have a personality disorder, and yes, personality disorders are mental health disorders. They are one of the 20 that would be listed in the DSM list. That we look at, but it is not one of the diagnoses that we would consider as being, a person being insane. Okay. So again, I just wanted to share this little information. I'm going to have some links on my website that you can look at a little more, igbattmho.org, to kind of help you to understand. But I just want you to understand that there are different types of mental illnesses, mental illness slash mental disorder. A lot of times people use those two terms interchangeably. But when we talk about mental disorders, we're talking about diagnosable disorders. We're talking about medical disorders. They meet certain criteria. A person can have a mental disorder and still be found competent to stand trial because competency has to do with a person's ability to understand at that moment what's going on. Okay. Is a person competent or incompetent at that moment? A person can be found competent to stand trial. Once they're during the trial process, their lawyer can introduce an insanity defense. Okay. That's fine. They have to prove under that insanity defense that that person at the time the incident happened, that they were psychotic, that they were out of touch with reality, that the symptoms of their mental illness played a role in what they did. Okay. So, and each state has their own different criteria. If a person is found to be um, competent and then later found to be not guilty by reason of insanity, they are sent to a mental health facility, a psychiatric facility. They will be there until probably from as long as they would have been if they would have went to jail. Okay, they're going to be there. The issue that comes in, to be honest with you, is when we look at if a person is found to be incompetent. If they're found to be incompetent and the trial stops, they are now at a psych facility. We don't know how long to be there because they're going to be there until they are able to become competent in order to go to move forward with the trial. That could be a long period of time. But the um, guilty by insanity, the trial is over. Okay, they've been found not guilty. It's over. Their sentence is to be committed to the psych facility, and they're going to be there for forever. So you don't have to worry about a person being found, getting away with a murder because they have a mental illness. Okay, if they need to having a mental illness doesn't give you a get out of jail free card. So I just wanted to share that. Again, spend some time looking up the different definitions. Look at competency. Look at the word incompetent, what that means. Look up what it means to be found guilty by reason of insanity. Look up what a mental illness is or mental disorder is. And we're going to have these, actually, we do have these definitions on our website. But I just wanted to kind of share that with you. You can find out more about us by logging on to our website at igbattmho.org. Have a great day.